This is In Between Them, a podcast where we uncover what it really felt like to be a child of divorce. I am Shannon Darrow, and each episode brings honest stories from brave adults who lived through this as children. This is In Between Them. Let's get going.
I'm super happy to be here, Shannon. It's always fun to spend time with you and chat.
Well, thank you. I feel like we could chat for hours about all things conflict and mediation and everything, but in the interest of, staying focused and just really getting the most out of this for my audience and for, people that might be listening who can take some of this and apply some of this to their life. I want to just kind of jump in, but first I would like to just give a brief introduction of you and then give you an opportunity to just share a little bit about who you are and how you got here. So I know that you're the director of the Institute of Applied Conflict Resolution and Mediation. You are also the founder of the Barks Neuro Mediation Method. You have taught, including myself, numerous people, probably thousands of people, how to conquer mediation, but to do it from a neuroscience perspective. So it is a different approach, and I'll let you kind of talk a little bit about that. And that's obviously why we're talking today. You're a best-selling author. You're a 2-time TEDx speaker. You spend a ton of time in family law. But also you do lots around the world. So what I would love to do is just kind of have you give your background, and then really, how did you end up deciding to get into the neuroscience side of things? Why did that appeal to you? And then we'll kind of jump in.
Gosh, thanks for that introduction. It's always weird to listen to the things that I've done. I was on a flight the other day, and there was somebody who was over the course of the flight was telling me lots of information about all the amazing things they had done. And I said, wow, you look amazing for 300 years old, right? When you're going through that, I'm like, gosh, I must look amazing for 250, But when I was little, I thought I would be an archaeologist or an anthropologist, but instead I went to college for marine biology. And when I got out of college, I did exactly what everyone expects that I would do. I went right into banking. And I didn't love it, but I was in the San Francisco Bay Area and brand new. I'd grown up in Las Vegas, and the Loma Prieta earthquake hit. And everybody scatters after a disaster and goes home to their friends and family, but I didn't have any of those. So for purpose, I started volunteering for the Salvation Army and Red Cross. And there was a section of the San Francisco Bay Bridge that imploded onto itself, trapping the cars on the lower section and the people inside those cars. And it became a major rescue site. And so the Salvation Army and Red Cross put me out there, handing out water bottles to the people. And sometimes the teams would, recover somebody, alive. And we were like, yay, this is amazing. And then other times it was not so positive because it was just a recovery of a body, and we would cry. And it inspired me so much that I went back to school to become a firefighter. And so my first real career was being a firefighter in Redwood City, which is just south of San Francisco. And on my days off, I had a manufacturing company. And somewhere along the line, I married a firefighter, and he became a fire chief, which made us like a military family. You go to a different city, and he took a job in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And too far for me to commute. So that ended my career. And so in Jackson Hole, I decided to, it also wasn't a manufacturing hub. So I started a wine bistro and lifestyle store. And so my Uncle Bill founded Dunkin' Donuts and also was the creator of franchising. So I bound and determined to follow in his footsteps. And so my business model was going great. But my marriage, not so much. And I decided to tell my husband that I wanted a divorce. And the next week I was driving with my littlest in the back seat of the car. And I get a call from Brenda, the bank manager. And she says, Carol, your $36,000 rent checks bounced for my business on the square. And that was a legitimate number back in the day. And I said, well, that's not possible. There's plenty of money in there. And that was when I found that my ex had been kind enough to empty the business bank account. So that chapter didn't take long for my business ambitions to come to an end. And I was doing a lot of consulting for other people in Jackson who wanted me to help them with their business models like I had been doing for mine. But I was really struggling because through this divorce process, I had lost everything. I had lost two of my three children. I had lost our house, my business, my health was tanking. And I wanted to recreate, but I didn't want to go through all that pain again. If I was at the bottom and I couldn't lose anything else. And so somewhere along the line, I started learning about neuroscience, and there were these neuroscientists that were doing some, just online educating, and I started nerding out on it. And eventually I went to a conference and started realizing that, wow, that's the way through. If I can figure out how my brain processes information, then I can control my brain rather than my brain controlling me. And so that was a long, long time ago. And so since then, I had the opportunity to become a mediator because I didn't have the mediator that I wished that I had had. So I became the mediator that I would hoped that I would have had so that I could help other people avoid going through all the chaos I did, because I was in and out of court for 8 years. It was just ridiculous. And it was really damaging to everyone involved, including our kids. And so with that in mind, at one point I got to run Idaho's largest mediation program. And with that, I was able to update the mediation processes with neuroscience. And we found that we were able to make it so much faster for people to get through their conflicts, and so much less stressful and contentious, and then much more productive. And so then that's brought me to today, where now I get to speak and train and teach and mediate on that, all over the world. So in a nutshell, there you go.
Well, if that doesn't paint the most beautiful picture of how people can just keep going and keep creating and keep learning, because from I guess from a marine biologist to a firefighter to what you're doing now, I mean, we're capable of so much. It's just being brave enough to keep trying, So I think it's a really neat story, because as we're talking about family law, people in that are faced with starting over a lot, or figuring out what they even are capable of. And so I think kind of unintentionally, that's a wonderful way to start this, to kind of show people that they can do anything,
Gosh,
if they just want to and try and are willing to work hard and all of those things.
yeah, and isn't that the truth? Because in those moments, those are some of the darkest moments of our lives. And we're having to let go of things that used to be our safety net. And it can be really, really scary. And you and I have both seen this in mediations, that people hold on to things that they just don't need to hold on to, because the tomorrows will be brighter. It's just hard to see in those moments.
Yeah. And I think, you said that you wanted to learn how, I'm going to totally mess this up, but you said about how you wanted to understand how your brain was working so that your brain could drive you and not your emotions, or something to that effect. I should have written it down because it was perfect. But what really hit me with that, I have a son who has really kind of moderate ADHD. He doesn't have the hyper part of it, but he just has some other kind of more executive functioning things. And my goal right now, and I feel like so much of this is coming from what I've learned in mediation and just neuroscience, because I feel that the more I can teach him, the more I can make him aware of what his brain is doing. I can't cure him or fix it or anything like that. But the more he can be aware, the more he can at least see things and conquer them that way. Or, just notice what's happening, notice what he's doing. I just think there's so much power in that awareness and that accountability that can come from it. So I see it in all facets of life, but from a divorce perspective, so getting into the family law perspective, and I want to talk to you a lot about what you do in mediation, but first I would love for you to just expand on what is happening to people when they're in conflict in a family law situation with all of the emotions that they're going through. And I know those emotions span so many different pieces. I mean, you just said we have to let go of things. I think that's fear. It's also fight. It's people don't want to. It's so much even wrapped up in that just my life is changing. I have to let go of these things. But,
Yeah.
what is going on that impedes people's ability, parents' ability to kind of get into what do their kids need?
Sure. There's probably about four main ones. There's fear, there's uncertainty, there's grief, and there's control. And all of those make such a good petri dish for disaster when it comes to trying to navigate a divorce because our brains are based off of pattern recognition. And when we cannot predict the outcome, we almost always create these what I call evil plot twists. Yeah, we go to that worst case scenario. And our brain is really just trying to keep us to survive for another day. That is our brain's main function. That's all it cares about. It's how do I keep you surviving with the least amount of energy available to us? And when we can't control or predict and our environment and we're grieving the loss of something that was supposed to be that great never ending love, then our brains just don't have the bandwidth to be able to manage what survival looks like. And our brains were developed, tens of thousands of years ago when we were dealing with warring tribes and saber-toothed tigers and, other aggressive things that could kill us on the spot. And our brains have developed in a way that responds like that every time, even though we're just dealing with interpersonal dynamics in there. And our brain doesn't do it like, oh, this is just a moderate problem. It's always full out. And full out in these moments where we're going to have to co parent with someone are oftentimes not the best versions of ourselves, right? That's where we say things that we wish we hadn't said. That's where we forget to ask the things that we need. We forget to keep our littles at the forefront of our mind, and we're doing some reactionary stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think something that you said in the beginning was, our brains want to control and predict, or it can't function when we can't control or predict. And I think that divorce is this weird thing where you feel it, but you're also trying to impart that control and predictability for your child. But I think to your point in the evil plot twist and how you go to this extreme that if we make this decision or if I agree to this, then I'm going to lose my child or my child's going to hate me or we don't, I don't, and I can't speak for all parents, but I think that a lot of times they're just trying to think of like, what is the fix for right now? And not thinking how, okay, this might be tough now, but in a year or 3 years, whatever that long-term result is, a lot of times it's going to vary from the short-term result. I mean, we know that just as we go through change and navigate change as adults. And so I think that also has to be another complicated piece is thinking short term versus long term in that control and predict when, yeah, I can predict probably that my kid's going to go sideways when I say this is what we're going to do. But what if in a year it's created a better relationship with both parents, or, something to that effect. It's just hard, I think, very hard for people to think further, let alone to think right now.
Yes. And I think that that's a great point that you bring up, Shannon, because where I see that crop up is where, again, we're all grieving, right? Both parties are grieving, the kids are grieving, the people around us are grieving, and, right, fighting for our side of whatever the narrative is. And so then we start shuffling our child from home to home. And of course, that child's going to have some emotional, some mental fallout from that. And what we oftentimes see is that when my child comes back from your house, Shannon, they're a mess, right? And they're crazy, and they're wild, and they're dysregulated, and I can't get them to do what they're supposed to do. And you're saying, well, they were fine when they were at my house, and all they want to know is when they get to come back to me, right? We hear that all the time. And that is really just normal what we have happening for our kids. Like, they are trying to figure out how to also control their own environments and their own sense of safety in there. So they're trying to figure out, how do I talk to parent one? How do I talk to parent two? How do I make sure that I don't get caught in their crossfire? And so then that adds this other level of chaos. And then something you had said made me think about that, the reality that not always, because sometimes people have a one night stand and now there's a child and they're co-parenting. But in the case of people who purposely entered into a relationship where they loved someone and that relationship is now falling apart, we oftentimes now villainize the other person. And they don't have to be the villain. We can still celebrate the love we had for them and know that it's just not the right relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, the more we create that chaos, especially if we have young ones, we have 18 years to go through this. And the faster we get it right, the less we screw up everybody's lives and make it miserable. And those are just some of the things that I see people mess up time and time again, is that they want to just destroy the other partner instead of really realize that we need those other partners. We need that difference in parenting. And not only do we need it, but our kids need it.
Yeah. You said so many things in there, but the thing that has become kind of interesting to me is what I have learned through the people I have spoken to already is so many people have difficult relationships with at least one parent when they're children. But then they go on, and in their adult years, they start to see that parent where they had that difficult relationship as a person. They learn more about that parent's upbringing, or they're able to put two and two together when they think, oh, well, my dad's mom was like this. That's why he's like this. He's just trying to do his best for me, but he doesn't know any different, And I couple that with the fact that as you get older as a parent, and this is kind of happening to me, my son is almost 13, you realize I only have my child for 18 years. When you get to be, closer to 50, 60, 70, all of a sudden you're going, my relationship with my adult child is so much more profound, and the longevity is so much greater than the 18 years. And not to minimize or diminish anything about the first very developmental and critical 18 years. But I think when we come to parents, and going back to your fear and the threat and the constant fighting, and you think of all of that and you think, okay, I could potentially, and my hope is that people realize I could potentially be damaging the relationship with my child, even though my angst seems to be at the other parent. The child is feeling it, hearing it, all of those things. But my goal should be just to get to that later part where I hopefully am reaping the benefit of, let's just say a not overly traumatic childhood. If I can just get through, and to your point of letting go, it's like I'm going to get to that acceptance of divorce is hard, it's not good on anyone, but I'm going to do it the best way I can to
Yeah.
preserve something, so that when I get to that point later, I have this friendship in my child, and a child that wants to see me and call me and spend time with me, and then we can learn from each other and all of that. And I just have found that to be really an interesting perspective as I've talked to a lot of these people who have had such a shift in adulthood. Um, and also, you kind of thought of, you mentioned when kids are going back and forth, they're what they're thinking, like they're trying to navigate, what do I do? How do I talk to my mom when I come back from my dad's, and I think that feeling of what is this child thinking is very hard for people to get into the head of. And I have a story of someone who kids couldn't talk about anything that happened at dad's. They would come home and mom just hated dad so much, so they knew that they couldn't say anything. So it was this intentional suppression. But what this man told me was, if I went to Disneyland with my dad, I wanted to come home and share that joy with my mom. I wanted to be able to tell her I conquered my fear on a roller coaster and it was amazing. And I couldn't, because I could not share anything with her because of that. And I think number one is how does a parent try to get, or really anyone that you're dealing with who has a conflict, but how do you encourage people to get into the mind of someone else to really try and feel what they may be feeling? Obviously, we never know what someone's feeling, but how do we get there? And then, what is that doing to people when children are having to intentionally suppress like that? Because I think that happens
Yeah.
a great deal.
Right. And yeah, there's a couple things that come to mind on there, and they're not exactly going to hit the mark, but I think overarching they will for you. And the first one is, as I had mentioned, I was in and out of court every year for 8 years with my ex. And I had adopted two children, a little girl that was 6 and her brother that were 4.5. And they had been taken away from their family for neglect and abuse. And they had a lot of mental health issues that we weren't aware of as we were raising them. And then I had my third child naturally. So there were three kiddos. But my middle child had something called antisocial personality disorder and a lot of other things, but he was targeting my little. So in the divorce, my ex had decided that and I had decided that we were living in Wyoming at the time. There weren't a lot of services that could help our kids. And so we decided he would take the two older kids to California because there were more services there, and I would keep our youngest. And he gave a lot of those narratives that were just horrible about me, and really kind of got the kids estranged from me. And after about 4 or 5 months, he went and found Biomom and said, "Here's your kids back," which is not something you can legally do. But that when I said I lost some of my kids, I lost two of my three kids to this way. But at some point, my daughter came and found me. So, and any kid that when I got her at 6, all they ever dream about is being back with their parents. That's all they ever want. It doesn't matter how destructive that relationship was. That's their person. And so my daughter had, now was re-entered with that person, and it wasn't as rosy as what she was expecting. And so she came and found me, but she was really, really mad, and because of all these things that were told and raising my court and fighting. And, I really dislike the man, and I'm glad that I have my kid all the time because he's not bothering to really try to see him. But once in a while he would. And one of the interesting things happens is like my ego gets in there, so I'm really mad at this person. I really don't like him. My child saying, I don't want to go, and then coming back and going, it was awful. But there was something that happened, which was my ex's new person would take pictures to memorialize these trips. And she would send my little home with a photo album of their time together to help him remember. And it was actually profoundly beneficial for me because I could see where my child was having a great time. And that was where I first started learning that there's a narrative that a child shares differently with each parent. But also along that line, I was loving having my kiddo all the time. The last time he saw his dad was in fifth grade, and he's 23 now. And at the same time, when we were at, say, football, I could see him just kind of looking at other dads and their sons. And he just looked like, that's never going to be me. And that broke my heart. And so I really became an advocate for his relationship with his dad. But his dad was really into fighting with me and thought that I was in the way and causing parental alienation. And so now, my son hasn't seen his dad in all those years, but the research says that 85% of kids that have been estranged from a parent will go find them in adult life. But in the meantime, from fifth grade to whenever that happens for my child, there's all the baggage that they've had to drag along that becomes the narrative of their life and guides their relationships and their views of themselves. And so my theory is, why not wait to fix that now? Whether you are the parent being estranged or you're the one who is maybe the roadblock for others, we're just causing a lot of damage for down the road that's going to be multi-generational trauma.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that's a great example of the emotions putting up such a boundary, kind of in a variety of ways, and somebody's got to lower the threshold. And I think you see that a lot where somebody wants it to change, but they are not willing to do what they need to do to allow for that change. And that's where, how, from a neuroscience perspective, how do you hold those two things in your head and not reconcile them to get to the thing you want, you know?
Yeah, good question. I think part of it is back to what we were kind of talking about with your son, is that we can be the observers of our brains. Like, we can slow down enough and really wonder, is this threat that I'm feeling real? Or is this just me reacting to something that seemed like it? In other words, a whisper from the past. Or am I just projecting my own stuff onto this relationship? And one thing that happens a lot of times, I find, in child custody mediation is we appear to be fighting for the best interest of our child, when really we're fighting for the best interest of the childhood version of me. So it has nothing to do with our kids. It's that I was scarred when I was growing up, and I don't want that to happen again. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with this case, but we are defending baby Carol or baby Shannon, so that happens a lot. And I think the other thing is to realize that, and Canada does it so much better than we do. We argue in the States for fight, fight, fight. I want, I want, I want, I deserve, I deserve. It's all about me and my experience with my child. And the more I can get, the better it is. And we sometimes stop to think about how that plays out in my real life. Like, gosh, maybe I have the child all the time, but gosh, I might be a better parent if I had a little bit of a break so I could have my own adult time. And in Canada, they actually build that in time where, like, every year I have 2 weeks where I can say, you take the child so that I can do whatever I want. And they get permission to do that. And I think I talk about that a lot when I work with parents, because they'll say they want all this stuff, and then I'll just talk about, how does that work in your life? Do you really have the ability to do it? And when they stop to think about it, they don't. And then it's a big relief when I say, then you don't have to ask for it, because for our kids, it's not a matter of whether we have equal time. It's a matter of, is my time with each parent productive and valuable and meaningful, and do I feel important to them? And those are some of the little things that start changing how our brains approach the other parent and shift the whole conversation.
Mhm. I think that's so significant, but also so hard for people. It's like thinking about anything in your life. What do I have the capacity to do? I might have the capacity to do a lot less than what I envision. And so I'm going to seem like I'm failing all the time. If I know that I can, it's motherhood is a great example of, I can do a lot, but can I do it all really well? There are days that I do it great and days that I just trying to get through the day, and to your point, I think that if parents could realize that quality and presence should trump equity, in some instances, not in all, obviously, that can just create not just a better situation for your children, which should be your number one goal, but it actually is a better, less chaotic life for yourself,
Yeah.
and I just think it's a really hard place for people to get. And I think you kind of said that we're coming at it from the childhood version of ourselves. I think I can 100% agree with that and see that. But I also see it play out where we are not accepting that we are getting divorced. And so therefore our life is going to look different. And so we're a lot of times parents fighting for the childhood that they would have been able to provide had they still been with the parent. And so they're trying to hold on. But at the same time, I recently heard someone say, let's just say you have whatever your parenting time schedule is, and the child has an activity on Wednesday. And the one parent who, is not coming from, let's say, the most healthy perspective will say, well, that's my day. So you're not doing that, or I'm not taking them. It's my time. And I think about how, coming at it from my perspective it's the child's life. It's the child's time. Is the child now not able to be a part of whatever it is because it's only one parent's time, and it's such a
Yeah.
convoluted way. But I think that happens a lot, and it's in that fight, and it's in that not understanding that the quality or what that child is seeing the parent do for them and how that can result in a stronger relationship. I mean, there's just so many things wrapped up in it, but I think it goes back to just that mindset that you're talking about of really not, what is our motivation? Is it whose childhood are we trying to live out here or protect or create,
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot to unpack there, Shannon, and that's good. I think one quote that came to mind is, I may not remember what you say, but I will certainly remember how you make me feel.
Mhm.
And when it comes to extracurricular activities, and when we argue with the other parent about whether we're going to take them or not take them, that's about us, and that's about control. Like, you're not going to control what happens on my day. And then we have the unintended consequences of that stance that we have with the other parent. So let's say that it's football, and our child is the quarterback of that team. And now our child can only go to football, to the games every other week. Well, what happens to the team when they can't have their quarterback? And what does it teach our child about the value of teamwork and the value of commitment and the value of your word? So, for you wanting to win, that you don't have to take them, you're teaching a boatload of leadership lessons, or you're not teaching them, that are going to follow through with that child through the rest of their life. And, really, when even if we were co-parenting in the same house, we would have to take our kid places we don't want to take them. And we would have disagreements about how we co-parent, period, right? So it's all okay. It's all okay in there. And it's all something that should be happening, and should be something that parents are thinking about from a co-parenting perspective. They really should be learning to um, treat each other as an ally in this rather than an enemy, which means that we might need to get some counseling. We might need to understand why we're reacting. What is that about? Were we in a power and control dynamic that was not productive for us? And now this is how we're trying to exert our power, but it's not in a productive way. Those are the things that we need to, really dial in on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I can edit this out for a second, but it said that your recording has an issue. Did it tell you that?
It did tell me that.
Does it?
I don't know why, but it went away.
Okay. Yeah, it shows me that everything looks fine. Hmm. Okay. I don't know how to check it.
It seems like it might be back on. I just closed some tabs on my
Okay.
side to see if that freed up some bandwidth.
I didn't see any other issues except that just popped up, but yeah, okay. We'll just continue. So,
Okay.
so I'll cut that out. And I know exactly what I was going to pick up with, so I'll just pick up with that
Great.
and then we'll start. So I think that's really interesting what you said about just the football example, and what you're teaching. I mean, you've said a couple times unintended impact or unintended consequences. I mean, I think that's really what this is all about, and what my entire podcast goals are, is to make people aware of it. I feel that if you are a parent and you become even, if you're a divorcing parent and you become even slightly aware of these unintended impacts, and you do one or two things less, then that is a win for kids. Because ultimately, what I constantly say and believe is, just because I or any parent gets divorced, that is my thing. And I have to live with that. But at the same time, I get to go on. I get to make new choices in my life. I get to do things differently. I get to learn from that. Children have to live as a product of that, no matter what. And it's a parent's choice how they do better or how they do worse from that moment on. I mean, what we know is from the adverse child experiences, scores, divorce is very high up there on a major traumatic event for a child, probably next to death. So I think to understand that they've already suffered this very traumatic thing, do we continue to compound that and be at war with each other? Or do we decide, well, we really want to still try and give this kid a fighting chance, so let's just make as good of decisions as we can. And yes, I don't like you very much. You don't like me very much. We got divorced for a reason. Thank goodness. Thank goodness we don't have to live with each other anymore. But how can we make good decisions so that this child doesn't continue to suffer when we get to go on. And that sounds very simplistic. I know that that is not a lot of people's reality, but the more people know and are aware, my hope is that they can see that they are doing that, because I think we're not seeing that we do that. You know,
Yeah.
I think a woman told me a story of how her parents had got divorced. Her dad had kind of had a girlfriend, and she was young, 5, 6 years old, and she was a daddy's girl. And one day she like came down in the house, and her dad's girlfriend's daughter was sitting on her dad's lap, and he was just kind of talking and going about it, like, in his mind, probably trying to make the little girl feel welcome, comfortable, probably trying to show the girlfriend, look, I can be normal and, loving to your daughter. But what this little girl saw in this other little girl sitting on her dad's lap was traumatizing to her. It was devastating. And I'm not saying that dad did right or wrong. I'm sure that situation is reflective in lots of people's blended families. But not having awareness around what that did to that little girl in that moment and how that really changed things for her. It's all of that, it's just that awareness that people don't have for lots of reasons. But I think if they can hear some of this, then maybe they pick up on some of it, and
Oh,
do
for
it a little less.
Yeah, I think back to what you were saying at the beginning of, just this exchange of dialogue is we have to love our children more than we hate our exes. And we've got to set that aside. And you had mentioned that the divorce or the breakup, and maybe it's not even ever a breakup, maybe it was a one night stand. That's about us. That has nothing to do with the kids. What we need to be doing is setting up the best life we can for them. And we know the thing that hurts kids the most are unintended differences and conflicts between their, are not unintended, but just unresolved differences between their parents. And that's what we need to stop, because those are the same things that, again, deteriorate our quality of life as well, but just create a whole host of things that lead into the ACEs test that you were referring to, that create problems down the line. So it just doesn't have to be that hard. Yeah, maybe I don't want to co-parent with this person, but I had a child with them and I chose to have that child with them. So now I get to deal with that, but my child doesn't have to bear the fallout of it. And every time we attack the other side, we shoot an arrow right through our little's heart on the way to the other parent. And we just need to not do that. But we have such a hard time with right fighting, right? And wanting to get our punches in so that we feel better about what went sideways. And I see it happen a lot where, like yesterday, I was mediating a case where the child had a lot of cavities, and the one parent was really concerned that the other parent was not having that child, who was really little, brush their teeth regularly. And the other parent blew up and said, well, I have them brush their teeth, and I can't help it if he forgets sometimes. And when the other parent had first brought it up, instead of just saying, I'm really concerned about our child having a hygiene issue, period, she went on and said, since they've been at your house. So now it's not just a statement that we could have had a conversation about. There's kind of a zinger at the end. And I notice that happening a lot. Instead of just saying what I need or what I'm concerned about, period, then we add a zinger on the end, which then makes it so that the other party cannot hear us because they're feeling attacked, and then they become defensive. So it's in all those little nuances that we have to make paradigm shifts. And those are just some of those brain friendly things where if I know it, then I can stop it, because now I'm not going to fire up the other person's brain so that they can still hear me.
Mm-hmm.
That's where
I
we
think,
move past
yeah.
this. Yeah.
That is a huge piece to point out, that the zinger turns someone's hearing off. And all you want is for them to hear. You think your zinger is actually like gonna get them to give you something. And in reality, it's just completely shutting them off, or it's getting a zinger back. So in no way is it the productive tool that you think it is, where you're, trying to use it as a mechanism for engagement. It's absolutely disengagement, and probably more combat, you know? So bringing kind of all of this to family law and mediation, I would love to hear what kind of strategies you utilize with people in mediation, and what you have seen work for people to get over that hump, to kind of get to the other side and kind of lay down their arms a little bit and do right for their children.
Yeah, one of the simple ones is to change the story that you're telling yourself, because your brain will filter information based on the narrative that it's receiving from you. If I'm looking at you as the problem, Shannon, then my brain is trying to solve you. And when we're in court and we're dealing with child custody issues, you are not the problem. You may be a contributor to the problem, but the problem is our parenting schedule or our approach to parenting. So if people can change the narrative to you are not the problem, you are actually my co-creator of the solution, then my brain isn't trying to fix you and your brain isn't trying to fix me. We are now co-creating a solution, and that takes the temperature much lower, and it helps our brains focus on the dynamics around the circumstance that's actually the circumstance that matters.
Mhm.
That's one step.
Yeah. I mean, why are we here? Or why isn't this working? Some of those questions to ask, to bring it kind of into the facts and the content of what is at issue. That sometimes it can be behavior. So that probably may not work in those situations. But when it is something like that, to your point, kids navigate parenting time schedules differently as they age. So I think a lot of times that is what takes people back to court. And so coming at it from not oh, mom wants to change this or dad wants to change this, instead of, we put this in place when our kid was 6 and now they're 13. If we don't want to have a war with our child, we probably need to look at this from a what makes sense for them and come at it from that perspective. And I think I can see how that would massively help people get over that fight and that obstacle of, you're trying to take time away from me, because that's essentially what always happens in that.
Yes, you're right. That is the norm. And I think the solution is to become conflict curious rather than defensive. Oftentimes, in those legal pleadings, the information that comes over is really negative. And it's really, if they're attorney driven, it's oftentimes an attorney doing the work that they do, right? Positioning their client for court. So the other person gets all mad, defensive, like furious. They never told me. And I think one of the first things to do is like just set all that aside. That's just the court process. If you're in mediation, that's going to work itself out before you get into a trial. And most of the time, it's going to anyway. But the question is, what are you trying to achieve and what has led into this? I just want to know. Like, I'm trying to unpack you, because I know I'm coming in hot and feeling very upset. But if I can understand the other side, then maybe this goes back to negotiation 101. Instead of just hearing you want more time that you're taking from me, which is the position, the interest is that somebody's struggling in school, or somebody's older, like you said, and doesn't want to bounce so much. Or we're finding that there's just too many differences because somebody's work schedule has now made it that our child's home alone in a way that doesn't feel safe and productive. So if we can switch from just that automatic knee jerk of I'm losing and I now have to fight for it, to really understanding what the other person is trying to unpack,
Mhm.
then that creates a different path. And I also would say that many times people get served with a lawsuit, which is never a good day, right? And so I oftentimes ask, did you try to talk to the person ahead of time? And so often people will say, well, no, I don't like to talk to them. You don't like court any better. It's going to be a much far worse, more uncomfortable process. So I love it when people have the hard talk before you decide to, legal up, an attorney up, and litigate up. It's just because everybody thinks that there's just this process, but there's all the psychic energy, if you will, that comes with that process, that makes us so stressed, that makes us stop living, that makes our child stressed. Because even if we don't say a word about the lawsuit, if the child didn't know, which they will know, they'll hear it when we're talking to a friend or something happens, they'll know, they always do. But even if we were to say they didn't know, they would feel the heaviness of their parents,
Mhm.
and the ambiguity of not understanding what's going on for why their parents are so stressed raises their blood pressure, it lowers our IQ, it hurts our memory, and it just destroys quality of life for everyone. And in a court system where cases can be a year before they're ever heard, that's not a great way to spend a year.
No. I mean, I think that's w kids may not know exactly what's going on, but kids always feel it.
Yes.
And I think so many times, and I see this happen, or I hear about it happen with, like, friends and family who think you can talk about it because your kid's over there not listening, they're watching a show or they're doing something, and it's amazing to me how people will just dismiss a child's ability to sense and intuitively feel the moment, or picking up on little things and putting the wrong things together, you know? I mean, it's just really, that's a whole 'nother thing of what kids fill in the gaps for when they only know a little bit or don't know anything,
Yeah.
and maybe ways to incorporate them so that they're not filling in the gaps with wrong things. But to your point, and I think what you were saying is people just lawyer up, and then what that creates from an energy perspective is never a positive. I don't find people thinking of mediation first. But if they could, and then could realize that it does keep the temperature potentially lower, and also, I think what you say a lot of times is the creativity that you're able to foster through mediation in terms of an agreement can reflect more what your child might need, that you're not going to potentially maybe get if you go to court. I think you can live out that mediation type of settlement for your
Mhm.
family a lot easier, because you've put it together with a little bit more, even if it's been difficult, you've put it together with a little bit more collaboration than if you were sitting in a courtroom and just being told what you're going to live out now. Um, so my question, for you, as you talked about being conflict curious and how mediation can lower that temperature, you're still going to have people that come into mediation, they want to do it, but they're still very angry.
Yeah.
So when you have content like you referred to, which is, let's talk about what's at issue here. But when you have people that can't even get to the issue because they come in angry, but they're going to try this, how do you get them to get over that kind of, let's say it's a cheating situation. One person cheated on the other, and for whatever reason, they've agreed to mediation.
Mhm.
How do you get them through that to get to a place where they can be productive for their kids?
Yeah, great questions. Again, I love the depth that you're thinking about this. One of the things that I love about mediation is it's not just an opportunity to get the situation resolved, but it's an opportunity to level up your skill set. And in those moments when we are angry, we're not the best versions of ourselves, right? And that anger is really our fight or flight system. That's our fight version. That's how we're showing up. And when that is activated, then our actual genius decision making part of our brain shuts down. So we don't have access to making those good decisions. So in mediation, my number one goal is to manage the physiology in the room. And back to our kids knowing what's going on, we have these things called mirror neurons, and they're in the front sides of our brains, and they are attached to empathy, and they're attached to us understanding each other. And so if you would see them in forms of when I smile, you smile, or when you're crying and sad, I get sad. It's our brain's way of understanding and connecting what each other are going through. So this is where even if we don't say a word, the other person can feel what's going on. That's where people sync with us. That's where nonverbal communication becomes so important. And so I'm watching and knowing that they're amped up. And so I also am watching their communication styles in mediation. And one of my favorite people to share their research is John Gottman out of the University of Washington. And he created the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And his research over decades have shown that if these are available or present in a conversation between two people, they will signal that their relationship fails with more than 90% accuracy. And one of the four signals a 96% relationship failure. I like to point those out individually, privately, in a caucus or an individual meeting with the client so that I can help them level up their communication methods. Because my thought is if you're saying something, you want what you said to be heard. But if you're not communicating effectively and that message can't be heard, then everything is for naught. So one of those is defensiveness. So when you say something and I start getting defensive and I start leveling up and I'm sending those missiles back, then I miss the opportunity to be conflict curious and just ask questions where it's so much easier to say, really, do I do that all the time? Or what would it look like if I didn't do that? Or what are you after? If I just left it with you and got curious and let you unpack your statement, I don't have to work nearly as hard and it doesn't keep my brain fired up to the same capacity. And another one is contempt. And contempt's that eye roll or the like, just whatever you're going to say, or I just shut down. And everything that you do is minimized to, is below what I do. If you just raise the kids that I did, or you were never there raising the kids, I was the one, doesn't mean the other person can't. But that's the 96% killer. And then criticisms in there where I'm saying you're back to the teeth brushing, you're not brushing the teeth. And I know because when I saw my kid at lunch, their breath stunk and that meant that they didn't brush their teeth in the morning. So we can have a complaint about the processes, but we don't want to criticize the other person. And then the other one is just shutting down where it's like, okay, whatever, Shannon, I'm just done talking about it. Nothing can happen if we don't stay in the games. But that's our freeze part of our brain, oftentimes when we get into that stonewalling. So maybe we say, this conversation doesn't feel productive right now. Let's reschedule for another time. And those things are okay. Or let's just take a 5-minute break. It's really helping people understand how they can leverage all those things that impact that physiology so that they can stay present instead of making reactionary decisions that are going to be more costly in a lot of different ways.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to, if that example you gave of maybe we should just reschedule or take 5 minutes, do you ever see people that instantly kind of gets them to drop some of that because they don't want to come back for another session, or they instantly kind of realize, you know what I mean? It's it's like they would rather drop it and get over it and be productive or somewhat productive now versus come back for another day. Is that ever used as a tactic, or is that just you're just simply saying this isn't working and then they kind of have a more natural response to that?
Yeah, it depends. It's always fluid depending on the exact situation. But what I tend to do is I'll put a pause in the parties talking together, and I will then, to the person who's escalating, I will say, "What's going on? What's triggering you right now? I can see that this topic is really frustrating you. Walk me through what your internal narrative about this is so that we can figure out how to get back to a productive conversation." And maybe the other person says, "Well, she always thinks she's right," or "he's never takes responsibility," or whatever it is. And then we can talk about the value of hanging on to that, or how we message that, or how we choose not to bite, how we stick with what's important in the conversation. Because we can argue about who's right and claim that, pedestal approach to we are so not the problem, and still we have to connect with that other person. So usually for me, what I can do is talk them through what's going on their internal brain with the other person out of the room. We can lower the temperature a little bit. We might do some breathing exercises. We might do some repositioning of talking about the weather or something that will change the chemical composition of what's happening in their brain. And then we can introduce the other person. Or maybe I have a private talk with the other person and say, "I've noticed this communication style is activating the other person, which means that they're not able to hear you as well. So do you suppose that you could dial it back a little bit because you were coming in a little bit hot?" And sometimes in that heat of the moment, people don't even know that they're yelling, or they don't know that they're accusing. But for me, what oftentimes happens is people will say, "Yeah, I know. I can be a lot. Yeah, I can do it." And when they dial it back, magic happens every time, every time.
Yeah, I would imagine that people don't know what they're doing often,
Right.
especially all that nonverbal stuff that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and if they don't know that they're doing it, they have no idea that they're creating this situation for themselves
Oh,
that they don't like. But it's this complete circle, that's kind of, and they're both doing it to each other. So
yeah.
it's just kind of like they're both spinning and creating an environment. So my last question really, it kind of brings all of this together. And you've said so many things that I think people can take from this. If they had the beauty of mediation and a mediator who's doing all of these things for them, then what a fortunate spot they're in for them and for their children.
Mm.
But let's say someone's, just kind of coming to this and they don't know where they're going to end up, but they're trying to do it in the best way. What would be kind of, and I don't know if you can even sum this up into one thing, but what would be your biggest piece of advice for parents to say, listen, I know you're coming at this from a really complicated emotional place, but your kids' success out of this is your goal. So your biggest piece of advice for how they can show up.
I think the best way they could show up is by assuming the best in the other person. And gosh, you and I both know how hard that is, especially if we have dependency issues, or any, intimate partner violence or things like that. Um, and still, I believe that people are doing the best that they know how. And maybe that best is really not really a great best, but it gives us a different lens for labeling that person. And then I want people to focus on the problem they're trying to solve, not in the blaming. So if I can say, I'm really frustrated because you're not taking our child to football regularly, or our child doesn't get to go to football regularly, then we can have a conversation about that rather than the person feeling like I'm attacking them for being a terrible parent. Maybe that opens the opportunity that I'll drive the kids to football. You don't even have to go. And then you get private parenting time. Or maybe our child doesn't really like football anyway, so we're just going that whole thing to it. So there's just, I think you have to be open to possibilities. You have to be really open to listening and really open to just talking about the situation without all those zingers, without all the emotions, those emotions. And it's not that we don't want the presence of emotions. I just don't want it to be where you're not, where you're attacking, where you're trying to use these conversations as counseling. That person is who they're going to be. And our goal shouldn't be to change them. Our goal should be to probably work within the parameters of them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, kind of back to people knowing their capacity for things, and if you do, then you're working within that in the situation as it has unfolded and how you have arrived at it, So my last piece that is not as in depth, but it is just something I ask everyone, based on your experience and kind of what we've talked about, do you have any book recommendation or something that you think people could reference or read that would steer them in the right way?
Sure. Gosh, there's so many, but the one that I love probably the most, and I use this when I teach at Boise State University and different universities, is Words Can Change Your Brain by Mark Waldman and Andrew Newberg. And to me, this book is such a great book. It's not a one and done. If I had it around, you would see that I have Post-its and tabs and paper clips all over it. You can get it on Audible. I like it better in print, but whenever I teach, I will re-look at the book. It's a process for brain-friendly communication. And I will remember every time, and I've been using it for a decade now, of gosh, this is just good stuff. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So that would be the thing, because that's if we can communicate better, we can get through these conflicts better.
Well, Carol, I can't thank you enough for your time and just your expertise and your insight. Like I said, I think somewhere along this, if someone can pick up one thing and ultimately do a little bit better for their kids, I think that's such a win. And so we could probably go on for hours and go on many different tangents because there's so much complication and layers within all of this, but it's just a start to the conversation. And to your point of, trying to get more people talking in this way, aware of this, you've got to start somewhere. And so I value your time, and I thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Shannon, thanks so much for having me. It's been so fun to have a conversation with you.
Thanks for tuning in. Together we can shape healthier paths for families to do divorce better. See you next time on In Between Them.